Daily Tech News Show is made possible by you, our listeners, and we thank all of you, including that Charlie dude, Justin Zellers, Pepper Geezy, and we've got 3 new patrons today. Everybody welcome Dwayne, John, and Chris. Welcome! Woo-hoo! Ow! On this episode of DTNS, if Google forbids ads that target children, why did Google allow ads that target children? We'll talk loopholes. Plus, Audible wants to get really smart about book recommendations, and Dr. Niki Ackermans walks us through some big advancements in DeepMind's AlphaFold model and what it might mean for us. This is the Daily Tech News for Thursday, August 8th, 2024. From Studio Animal House, I'm Sarah Lane.
From Columbus, Ohio, I'm Robb Dunewood.
From Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I'm Dr. Niki Ackermans.
And I'm the show's producer, Roger Chang.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about today. It's been a lot of tech news for August. You know, whatever happened to the summer slump of tech news? I did not feel that in 2024 yet.
Not
I
this
don't know.
summer.
We've got more summer coming, I guess. But yeah, we got a lot of stuff today. So let's get right on into the quick hits. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman's sources say that Apple will ship an M4-powered Mac Mini sometime before the end of this year, and said to be the company's smallest computer ever. Also the first major Mac Mini design change in 15 years. Kind of a big deal. The mass upgrade to the M4 processor would also mark the first time Apple is putting the same gen chip in all of its Macs across the whole line. There will reportedly be 2 versions of this M4 Mac Mini, a base configuration that might start shipping this month, and an M4 Pro expected to ship in October.
The UK's Competition and Markets Authority announced Thursday it has enough sufficient information to launch a formal merger inquiry into Amazon's investment in Anthropic. The CMA has until October 4th to decide whether to escalate the inquiry into more of an in-depth Phase 2 investigation. CMA could ultimately clear the deal, require the companies to make changes prior to approval, or block the deal outright. Amazon responded with working with Anthropic to help Anthropic expand competition and expand customer choice. Anthropic said that it's an independent company and that partnering with Amazon doesn't affect its freedom to partner with others.
Well, they would say that, but you know, maybe they're right. We will find out what the CMA wants to do soon enough. Kia and its parent company Hyundai both use anti-theft software designed to make it harder to bypass some vehicles' security systems using simple tools, as simple as a USB-C cable in certain respects. A software update that first rolled out in February of last year to owners of Hyundai and Kia models that don't have electronic immobilizers has cut theft rates by more than half. That's according to the Highway Loss Data Institute. However, vandalism remains an issue since would-be car thieves who aren't aware of the software update ahead of time can still go ahead and damage cars that they can't actually steal.
Yeah, the Kia boys here in Columbus are tearing stuff up when they can't get them. So it's a shame. Machine learning and data science platform Hugging Face announced Thursday that it's acquired Seattle-based ZHub, a dev platform founded by former Apple researchers to help ML teams better collaborate with large data sets and models. Financial terms weren't disclosed, but CEO Clem Delaney tells Forbes it's Hugging Face's largest acquisition to date. The company says ZHub's team will help the 5 years of growth of Hugging Face's data sets and models by switching to its own better version of large file storage as its backend. The Hugging Face Hub currently hosts 1.3 million models, 450,000 data sets, and 680,000 spaces, around 12 petabytes in LFS.
Ooh, that's a lot of petabytes. When Google announced the Google TV streamer earlier this week, a lot of people wondered, but why does my beloved Chromecast have to die? It's great. Why not both? In an interview with The Verge, VP and GM of Google TV, Shalini Govil-Pai, says it was in response to user feedback that the Chromecast was great and inexpensive, but ended up having lots of competition and didn't stand out anymore. Instead, Google used the NVIDIA Shield as inspiration for the streamer, both in performance and in price. All right, the Financial Times reports that Google worked with Meta to roll out ads that targeted children. Now, this is interesting because doing so violates Google's own rules. Google restricted ads targeting children, that's anyone under 18, back in 2021. However, recently the company tested letting Meta advertise Instagram to YouTube users. Obviously, YouTube owned by Google, which is owned by Alphabet, all the same company here. Now, those were users within the 13 to 17-year-old age range. Now, how did it do that and why? Apparently, a loophole of sorts. Google targeted a group of users that it labels unknown. Users that, for whatever reason, don't fit a certain age demographic, even though Google apparently had enough data points inside that unknown group that said a large number of those users under the label were in fact under 18, probably just didn't add their age, or for whatever reason, it was somewhat obvious that they said they were over 18 and they weren't. The marketing program was launched in conjunction with media agency Spark Foundry back in Canada, between February and April. It performed pretty well. Google and Meta kicked off a trial run in the US in May. There were plans to expand regions and include other Meta apps in the campaign, according to the Financial Times, which reached out to Google about this, at which point Google said, all right, we've investigated and we have decided to ultimately cancel the project. It added, we prohibit ads being personalized to people under 18, period. So what it sounds like is going on here is Google says, we've got a stance. You know, we can't target ads to people under 18, whether, you know, Google, YouTube, you know, our whole portfolio of services that we offer. Okay, great. So Google and Meta get together and Google says, well, you know, you can't do that, but we have this unknown category. And it seems like a lot of the people in the unknown category are that sweet spot of, you know, teens, young teens, 13, all the way up to 17. And we could do that and you wouldn't be targeting to children because they're unknown. Their ages are anyway. I don't know.
This is why.
It's kind of tricky. Yeah, Rob, how mad are you about this?
This is why people just have a distrust of social media platforms.
Yep.
And why so many in the government want to regulate them. Here you have Google that they created these rules, not because they thought it was good for children, but they thought that it was going to take heat off of them. If we don't advertise to children, then maybe that'll alleviate some of the heat that we have. But while doing that, they say, oh, but here's this other group and we know it's children, but we haven't officially flagged them as such. So we're going to go ahead and give other social media platforms the ability to advertise to them, even though this is absolutely against the rules that we set up for ourselves. So what ends up happening, you're going to have people in Congress that are going to make laws that are probably, you know, do too little or too much at the wrong time, as compared to the companies themselves just policing themselves and actually following their own rules. So yeah, this is not going to do anything, in my opinion, to make anybody feel better about how Google operates.
And I wonder if this was a case of, well, we kind of know about this, but let's just wait and see if anybody notices and like, oop, they noticed, never mind, we're dropping it. Or, oh, we actually didn't know.
It does sound like that.
Curious how quick they like hot potatoed that.
Right. I mean, you know, this is Financial Times sources that also, you know, had some, again, you know, this is information coming from sources that Google reportedly told Meta that daily engagement that it gets from that age group, 13 to 17-year-olds, exceeds TikToks and Instagrams. Now, both of those platforms have a huge number of young users, TikTok in particular. So this, you know, if this was something that was like, this is a treasure trove, you know, of, you know, really, really important users, that I can see any company, I'm not even talking about Google specifically, but a company that's big and says, gosh, you know, what do we do with this? How can we monetize this? That is, it's kind of, you know, it's like a big pot of money. Like, well, you're not supposed to touch it. It's against our rules. Well, what if I put a mask on and you don't realize it's me? Well, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the disingenuous part for me is that Google says it investigated and ultimately canceled the project, adding, we prohibit ads being prioritized to people under 18, period. I don't know that that's a period. I think you prioritize it when you get caught by news organizations that call you out for it. And then you say, oh, yeah, we're investigating ourselves and we don't do this kind of thing that we're actually doing right now. So it's,
I mean,
yeah,
the story can go I think, two really different ways. Okay, let's call, we've got this unknown category, or Google says we just, the data that we have on these folks, we just can't pinpoint, to a certain age. So it might be weird, but it might not be. Might be fine. We just don't know. So we'll call it unknown. If Google was like, let's just do something with this unknown category, and we just don't know. Very much turning a blind eye, because this is Google after all. I mean, data is what they do. Well, that would be one thing. If somehow Google could prove that it truly just was lax rather than knowingly doing something that was against its terms. The other side of this is Google said, we know we can't do this, but we're just going to do it. And we will cloak it under this category. It's Google and Meta obviously working together, which doesn't help either company's case. Because both companies, I mean, Google has had a real bad week in general, but Meta has had a bad decade as far as, using data from users in ways that the users don't realize, and particularly with young people.
Yeah, if I guess
great.
Google's point is that, well, it's not a foul if a ref doesn't call it. So we're just going to do what we do until somebody calls us on it, and then we will act like we were never doing this thing in the first place. So it's really disappointing, because it does nothing, as I said earlier, to make anyone trust them more that they're going to handle how they deal with children in an effective manner. It's probably going to take legislation to make them do it, under the threat of legal fines. So we'll see how that goes. Audible, Amazon's audiobook platform, has introduced an AI-powered search tool called Maven, designed to help users discover audiobooks more efficiently. Maven allows users to allows listeners to input natural language queries to receive tailored recommendation from Audible's vast library of nearly 1 million titles. For example, you could say something like, I'm looking for an uplifting fiction novel with a female protagonist, and Maven would return a book suggestion that met your search criteria. Maven is currently in beta testing and is accessible to roughly half of Audible's US customer base on iOS and Android devices, regardless of membership tier. So I threw this story in because I like the fact that we still are not even 2 years into the AI craze, but this is a way that I see AI as actually being truly useful. You're looking for a book. You don't have a particular book in mind. You just have the particular style of book that you're looking for. And you can go to Maven and say, hey, I'm looking for a book with these attributes, and it'll go through its database and find that type of book for you and return it. I think that is an incredible way that AI is being used to give consumers information that they are looking for.
Yeah, I think this is really cool. As an avid user of Audible, but also Kindle a lot, I hope they expand this to the written part of their books, because right now when you're trying to look for a book, it's actually really hard to get, unless you know what title you want. You'd be like, well, I want something kind of like this, but kind of like this. You can't really Google that generally and get a really wide variation of things. I do wonder what it is basing itself off of to select the books. Is it the whole transcription of the book? Is it just the summary? Is it just keywords? And then would maybe less influential authors have to kind of change the way that they write their blurbs so that it gets picked up by this? Is something I'm kind of curious about.
Yeah, it's like book AI SEO.
Yeah, right.
Which exists already. But this, I mean, I don't use Audible regularly today. I was an enthusiastic user some time ago, and I just kind of fell off, and so that's neither here nor there. But the searching for a book that just fits what I'm in the mood for, I don't know that I am the right audience for that, because pretty much everything that I read, when I'm talking fiction, so nonfiction is a little bit different, but fiction stuff always comes from recommendation of a friend. A friend goes, Sarah, you got to read this book. Oh my gosh, it was great. It's a book about whatever it's about, and sometimes they go, Civil War book. I don't know if I'm in the mood. They're like, no, it's so much more than that. You just got to read it. And most of the time, because, your friends are friends for a reason, I read the book and I go, oh, I loved it. Thank you for the recommendation. I never would have found this otherwise. If Amazon, and specifically Audible could be even, get that right 50% of the time, especially based on what I've already read, and not only like this is the kind of romance novel I'm looking for, but also these are the ones that I've liked prior.
Yes.
That could be really powerful.
Maven could be your recommendation friend. I think that's a niche that has yet to be tapped into, and there's a lot of money to be made there, honestly.
Yeah, I think so.
You have to get it right.
I personally, half the books I read are because somebody told me, "Hey, go check this book out," or you saw a review.
Yeah.
But that really is kind of limiting the number of books that you may be interested in. So if I can just go in and say, "Here's the type of book that I'm looking for," and it gives me back some good examples that weren't necessarily, bestsellers or something like that, but they're still good books and they're meeting the criteria that I'm looking for. I'm all for it, because right now searching for something that you don't already is kind of like, if you don't know what exists, it's hard to search for the thing that you don't know that it exists. And this seems like it would help with that.
Yeah, and I think we're in a bubble right now between like a bookstore where like, okay, you kind of go by vibe and by color of the, the picture on the cover. And then like in Audible, you've got the tiny little icons, but it's harder to find that vibe. So something like this could really help with that. And again, I hope if it works out, that it gets ported to something like Kindle as well, since it's also Amazon.
Totally. Yeah, especially for writers that are self-publishing or just smaller publishing houses. I can't tell you, how many times I've had, a friend. Well, I mean, I can probably tell you how many times. Not all my friends are published authors, but quite a few of my friends have published books, and it's like, if you're not on the New York Times bestseller list, you don't get a lot of attention. Like,
How do
even
people
if you're
find
doing a
your book?
tour.
Yeah.
Right. It's the whole discovery part of books can really be rebuilt from the ground up. And Audible is one of the biggest, is certainly in the audiobook game. So I say, bring it on.
Hopefully they let it accessible to everyone, and not just the super big authors that get promoted because they can pay to get promoted and things like that. That would be the wrong way to go with this.
Indeed. Well, we're clearing out some inventory from the DTNS store this week. We've been telling about it to you all week because we want you to get some stuff on sale. We've got some great deals on merch right now. Mouse pads, $2. DTNS mugs, $5. Put coffee in it, put water in it, put vodka in it. We don't care. They're cool. These prices are helping us clear stuff out of our merch partner Dave's barn. Got a big barn, but the barn needs some room. So if you'd like to support us with a tactile item or gift it to somebody else, now is the time. Back in May, Google unveiled the latest version of its AlphaFold AI model that predicts the shape of protein structures, AlphaFold 3. In a paper published in Nature, Google claims that the newest model of AlphaFold 3 can predict the structure and interactions of all life's molecules with unprecedented accuracy. Sounds pretty significant, right? What does it mean, though, in practical terms for scientific discovery? And what exactly is the AlphaFold 3 doing to achieve those results? Are probably some questions that you might have. Thankfully, we have Dr. Niki Ackermans with us today to tell us. Niki, explain. Why are we excited?
Sure. So Google's DeepMind launched AlphaFold back in 2018. Just to give an overview, it's an LLM that uses computational modeling, like you said, to predict shape and structure of proteins. And it does that based on using amino acid sequences as building blocks. And until now, this has remained the leading method of protein prediction to date. Otherwise, it's a lot of trial and error in a lab that takes much longer. But actually now DeepMind has debuted AlphaFold 3. So in May of this year, they published their findings, and they showed that the latest version is about 50% more accurate than AlphaFold 2. And most importantly, what everyone was excited about, it's now able to predict interactions from proteins with other molecules, which makes it increasingly versatile and is very exciting for the scientific community.
So Dr. Niki, how is this going to change the science of all of this?
So, great question. Like I said, this technique created a huge acceleration compared to the lab-based techniques, and it's across all different fields since protein structure is foundational to most aspects of biology, honestly. And so one of the limiting factors was that even though you could model a protein structure, there was almost no way to predict how it would interact with other molecules. There's an infinity amount of ways that things could interact depending on the chemical structure, et cetera. But and actually, we brought that up in 2022 on the show when we talked about the launch of AlphaFold 2, about how that was one of the limiting factors. But now with AlphaFold 3, this is a huge step towards understanding these new interactions between proteins and between proteins amongst themselves, but also with larger molecules like DNA and RNA. So it's getting pretty medical at this point. And if you were to do this with a traditional technique, you would take probably months of trial and error, and this maybe happens in a matter of minutes.
So what other good stuff are we going to get with this new launch?
So one thing that people were complaining about with AlphaFold 2 was that even though it was an open tool, it was actually really complicated. It needed a lot of processing power and overall pretty difficult to use. So while it was out there, the scientists were kind of struggling to make it work with what they needed. So now, on top of the improved modeling and more accuracy of the proteins, DeepMind is offering AlphaFold Server, which is a free web-hosted application for non-commercial use that includes almost all of the functions of AlphaFold 3 and makes everything a lot easier.
So almost all of the functions, but what have been some of the critiques of AlphaFold 3?
Yeah, I did say almost all of them. So it lacks a few functions like the ability to input custom inputs and only provides a finite list of molecules to model. And I'll come back to that later. It's also limited to 20 inputs per day, which does limit researchers who are doing high throughput studies if you can only look at 20 associations. And the big change since AlphaFold 2 is that it is no longer an entirely open product. And so they did not declare the training process for the model. Some of the methodology were not available to the public and not published in a Nature publication, which is usually not allowed. And so researchers have criticized the lack of open source code. It makes it difficult to back up the AlphaFold's team's claims, and it makes it difficult to test and reproduce their findings. And so the community sees this as a deviation from community standards and are kind of criticizing Google, but also Nature for this publication.
Sorry, Rob. Just a question about the 20 inputs per day. You mentioned that something that could take months could be performed in minutes using AlphaFold 3. So why the 20 inputs per day limitation?
Well, 20 inputs per day, imagine that would probably take you months. So it is definitely accelerating things, but I imagine that leads us to our next point of why are they making this less open? There's a few different reasons. And one of them is money, because in parallel, Alphabet subsidiary Isomorphic Labs has launched their proprietary version of AlphaFold 3 that has all of the bells and whistles, and they're putting it to work for drug discovery for pharmaceutical. So in the pharmaceutical field, this has a huge capacity, and meaning that, yeah, we'll provide this for free, but for the money-making stuff, we're keeping it for ourselves, which I understand to a certain extent. But this, using this for drug developers allows them to quickly identify promising targets and model their hypotheses at a molecular level extremely quickly. So, if they're saying, what can this drug do? Let's run 50,000 sequences and find out. And they don't want people to do that at home. They want to keep that for themselves. And that's why they're limiting it to 20 for the free version. And it's knocking years off the drug development process. So I said there's two reasons why it's less open. The other one is that Google's claiming that AlphaFold 3 now covers all of life's molecules, all of their chemical modifications, and all the ways in which those molecules can control healthy function of cells. That means that it covers both the good and the bad molecules. So one of the reasons why Google is claiming that they restricted access is because they're working with biosecurity experts to make sure that the model is used responsibly to avoid lowering barriers to engineering harmful pathogens or toxins. So those are their two big reasons why they kind of closed it down compared to the last version, but I'm sure you guys have opinions.
So understanding molecules, to help, eradicate a disease that we haven't eradicated yet great
Yeah.
version of the story, using the same tools to, I don't know, spread some. Well, anthrax already exists, so you probably wouldn't be drinking
Anthrax
that, but-
Plus.
But yeah, right. Anthrax Pro, into the, community's drinking water type thing.
Okay.
That is something that has to be taken into consideration too.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to take into consideration that if you can build bad bugs with this, that you would want to put some reins around it. But something tells me that the money-making opportunity is probably the bigger reason as to why it's not as open. As compared to
Yeah,
creating
it's
something that
funny
could
how
destroy
they
life as we
kind of
know it.
didn't talk about that as much, but listen, I mean, they weren't just going to let people use their tool to develop drugs and not jump on that money opportunity. I kind of get it. Like, drug development is a huge moneymaker, and someone's going to do it. I mean, it is great that we find new things that can solve diseases, but I can't do it in my lab. Some company that's equipped for it has to do it, and they're going to profit off of it usually. Sorry to keep punching on Google today, but this is part of the game. People are upset that it is not open coded, and it is a step down from the last version. And I don't know. I feel like they really could have provided at least, how they train the model, because how are you sure that, they're saying it's a correct structure, but how do you know for sure?
I mean, I guess the money aspect of this is sort of a no-brainer, right? It's kind of like womp womp, of course, big pharma. But I mean, can there be any other explanation as to why, well, only some of these pharmaceutical companies that, they, that the labs are already there. They've got the team that are, the brightest minds in all of science, making the next cancer drug that's going to help humanity live until 200 years old type thing. And it's just irresponsible for us to allow these tools to just anybody, who happens to, put themselves in a research field. I mean, is there anything to that?
I mean, all I can think of is really like, it would be a shame for someone else to make money off of our tool. I don't think that the non-drug developing labs are using this, using it in a nefarious way, excuse me, or for profit, other than like they're just figuring out molecules. And
right,
it would really be like, having a prize horse and letting it run out into the wild. So part of me is like, well, someone had to do it, but they could have provided their code. I think
Method Man said it best. Cream, cash rules everything around me. This is just one of those situations where the potential to make money is incredible with this.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. So, it's like, I understand why people are upset, but I also understand why Google's doing what they're doing.
And if they wanted to not be evil, they could have just made all these drugs and given them to people for free. I think that would have been really unevil of them.
That would have been the opposite of evil. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not
unless
how the
the
world
person
works.
who got the drugs was just evil already, and now they can be evil even longer and in a more healthy way.
More in GDI.
Well, thank you, Dr. Niki. Yeah, we if anybody has questions, put them in our chat room. We'll continue this in GDI. But first, let's check out the mailbag. George wrote in about the big difference between 20 and 21. That was part of our latest CrowdStrike explainer from our show yesterday on Wednesday. George wrote in, I had to laugh a little when you explained the CrowdStrike bug because I've been there. I'm not downplaying the harm that it caused. Instead, I'm saying it happens quite often when using languages like C, C++, Java, and Python because they're not naturally memory safe. When developing, you have to take more care than if you were developing in memory-safe languages like Go or Rust. Bounds checking inputs and indexes is part of secure coding, and often only learned the hard way. I've thought, gee, this bit of code won't ever be accessed incorrectly. I don't need to check the input data, and I was wrong. Haven't made that mistake again, and I bet neither will the developers at CrowdStrike. Well, thank you, George. Yeah, we talked yesterday, like, hey, this was a real bad meltdown. The CrowdStrike folks obviously wish it didn't happen, and so do all the people who were affected by it. And George says, as a programmer, it happens. So there you have it.
Well, thank you, George, for the email, and thank you, Dr. Niki, for joining us this Thursday. Tell folks where they can find out more about what you've got going on.
Yeah, sure. Easy peasy. I'm over at NicoleAckermans.com. We just found out that one of our papers got picked up by a dinosaur podcast, and that's always fun from podcaster to
Cool.
podcaster. So go check that out. And yeah, that's where you can find all the research and non-research stuff.
Excellent. It's always good when Dr. Niki's with us. Patrons, we love you too. Stick around for our extended show, Good Day Internet. This is going to be a fun one. 3D printed homes. Not only already a thing, but kind of thriving, at least in Texas. We're going to tell you all the details, and then we can all decide if packing up and moving in GDI is the right thing for us to do. Everybody get your suitcases out, and then we'll talk about the 3D printed home that is the home of our future.
You can also catch the show live Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC. Find out more at dailytechnewsshow.com/live. We'll be back tomorrow with a summary of what happened at Black Hat with David Spark.
The DTNS family of podcasts, helping each other understand.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.